and only people and companies listed there are allowed to make substantive contributions. So welcome to an interim meeting. This one will be focused on testing. So we're going to talk about the implementation status of WebRTC 1.0, go over the WPT issues and PRs, talk about some principles for test design. Fippo will go over an example test. We'll talk about cross-browser testing using WPT. That will be Leonard. And then Alex will give us an update on Kite. Announcement about the face-to-face. We are going to have it in Stockholm at the Google offices, June 19th to 20th. We will support remote participation for those who can't show up. And I think all of this has been announced on the list, but just to make you all aware so you can make travel arrangements if you want to come in person. All right, about this virtual meeting, the meeting info is up on the wiki. We'll also put slides, links to slides there as well. We are recording the meeting, yes, Vivian?
Yes, it's in progress.
Okay. And the WebEx info hopefully around here, so you've got it. Okay, so we're going to talk about basically what we said we would. The first topic is implementation status. Is Dom on the call? Maybe not.
Okay. Yes, I am Dom. Sorry.
Oh, there you are. Okay. All right. So the basic question is how we measure implementation of the 1.0 CR. Various people have commented that the dashboard, the WPT dashboard, isn't the best way because it doesn't mean you can still implement things and then have interop problems. So basically, WPT test dashboard doesn't claim to have useful metrics for evaluation or comparison of features. So instead, we've been looking at the Web Confluence project, which looks at properties and methods that are exposed by browsers. Of course, this then doesn't bear on the interoperability or conformance part of it. It just says, hey, this stuff is there. So Dom, you wrote a tool that extracts data from the tracker?
Yeah, basically it looks at all the properties or all the interfaces defined in the WebRTC specs and extract the data from the Web Confluence data and present them in a somewhat easier to read table, highlighting in particular those methods and properties that have less than 2 implementations, in some case 0.
Dom, I think your microphone is low. I can't hear you.
Sorry, yeah. Is this any better?
A little bit, yeah.
Yes, it's a little better.
So yeah, the extraction highlights which of the methods and properties have little or no implementation using the red hues.
So let's take a look at what that gives you. So a couple of conclusions from this. There's a bunch of stuff that no browsers currently support. Get default ICE servers, on ICE candidate error, various SCTP related object stuff, on stats ended, per connection ICE error event, ICE event URL, get supported algorithms. One which didn't make sense to me is ICE candidate attributes. I thought we had implemented those. Set codec preferences. On state change of DTLS wasn't supported, although on DTLS state change was because there was a name change, data channel priority, and a bunch of stuff that only one browser supports. Some of which might get fixed at some point. So just pointing out the general green-red state of things and whether they're expected or not. Once we get into the objects like the sender, receiver, DTLS, and ICE, things get a little bit more red. An SCTP transport object is not something I think no browser has implemented that yet. All right. So one question that came up is how does some of these results change when you use adapter.js, which I don't think the current Confluence or tracker is doing. And one thing I noticed, I wrote a little script to look at it that way, and it turns out there are a bunch of name changes that we made that results in things being read where they actually aren't. So we changed onDLS state change to onState change, onIce state change to onState change, get nominated pair got changed to get selected pair, DTMS sender capitalization changed. So a bunch of because of the name changes, a bunch of things don't show up in the Confluence tracker, and also there's some things that can be shimmed via adapter. Like if you have an ICE gatherer, you can shim get local candidates, ICE transport.get local candidates. And I think that the lack of the ICE transport attributes may be due to this, although I'm not entirely sure. So the question is, for the purposes of understanding what's been implemented, should we perhaps separately track results with adapter.js so that some of this stuff can get worked in? Any comments? I mean, the alternative would just be to change the Confluence tracker, I guess, to look for some of the name changes, but that would create its own categories, which could be
I mean, from the list you have here, it doesn't seem like the difference would be all that great.
Yeah, it's just basically you get another for the stuff where you change the names, you just get another browser showing up in the list of implementations for those things. It's probably at maximum 10 entries in the table. Probably less. It's about 7, I think.
I always saw the adapter.js as like a tool to mitigate the differences between the different browsers, not so much as something which helps with having a more spec compliant browser. So I guess from that perspective, I would say no without adapter, but I'm not feeling strong about it.
Well, I think adapter does let you program toward the spec, or sort of the more newer use of it. But I agree that I'm not sure the value add would justify someone having to do this.
Okay, so you can just keep the tracker more or less as it is.
I mean, if someone wants to do it, I mean.
Yeah, it's not hard. I mean, we can talk about it. We would do it separately. It's not a huge deal either way. It's just we noticed that there are 7 things that are red that might turn a little greener if we track the name changes.
I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that it might be useful, if not to specifically run tests with adapter.js, to collect annotations at least on the red method and properties, so that we understand whether this is likely something as trivial as a name needing to be fixed versus nobody has implemented this and we don't know if anyone will.
Right. I think it might depend on the charter. I mean, the charter has a bit scary language that says if only one browser implements something, then it might be removed from the spec. Right. So in that case, if we're going to use this for decisions like that, then I think maybe we should use any measure that won't miss a feature.
Yeah, that was my concern, Jan Ivar, is if we're, for removal purposes,
right.
I think this would be useful to just say, hey, we did do this, except the name, there was some name changes.
Actually, I was going to jump in and say I do think it would be useful. actually to have adapter.js, and I know that that's probably not popular with those of you who work for companies that produce browsers, but it is still part of the story that we tell developers, right? It is part of what we say. If they say, yeah, but you guys aren't up to date yet, and we can say, well, use adapter.js. Okay, so I think it's fair to list it, and if it does effectively count as an implementation, then it will help us with the test passing, like you mentioned.
Are we talking or considering here only the two options of like either or? And I think it would actually be helpful. I think like Dom had like probably like similar suggestion of like if we in the same table would basically show something which says like, oh, by the way, if you use adapter.js, these change in the following way, like they become more green or whatever.
Right.
I mean that might be very helpful. I would only have problems with basically if the results would be like only adapter.js, then they kind of like start to hide the real implementation, right?
Agree.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah.
No, don't hide
it. It was just adding another entry for the adapter stuff, just so because also adapter, I think I looked at it, I was a little surprised it can remove things, so I don't think you want to make that the only way to look at it. Anyway, we can look into Dom. We can look into having a separate entry for adapter. I don't know if that might have to change the Confluent scripts or something. But.
So if a feature can be shimmed in adapter, that would be enough to save it from removal of the spec. Is that what we're saying?
Certainly a consideration.
Right.
So I would say that it would depend on the feature, but I mean, if something's implemented in two browsers and it interworks, then it's clearly done. If something is if a functionality is implemented and interoperates with the help of adapter.js, it means that one browser is close enough and another browser is well, at least two browsers are close enough that we can paper over the differences, which probably means that we understand the spec, which is the reason for the removal language. If two people understand the spec, then the spec is possibly understandable. If two people can't implement it, then we have not tested that the spec is understandable.
Yeah. Just to keep in mind, though, of course, this is just at the Confluence level, so it doesn't really demonstrate any interop or conformance or anything. It's just showing that, hey, it did get implemented. But anyway, I think for purposes of this discussion, it's just Dom and I will look into adding an adapter.js column to it and have that available. Okay, so next part of the meeting is WPT and lots of stuff about that. So just wanted to show you briefly this web platform test dashboard. Many of you have looked at it. The major thing to notice here is just it is a bunch more red than the Confluence tracker. And we'll be talking about some of that redness, and some of it is caused by permission timeouts and other stuff, which we'll get into in a moment. So just generally looking at it, one sees a lot of red here, but not necessarily reflective of what's been implemented. For reasons we will talk about very soon. Okay. So
just for context on the red there, I mean, you can have 99 tests implemented and one fails and it's red, right?
Yeah.
Right. Is there actually an option to, specifically for that scenario, to like maybe change the color to something less frightening, like yellow?
Yeah, that might be a little bit better.
Because it is somewhat confusing, at least to me, if you have like 90% tests pass and it's like red. I mean, from a CI perspective, I understand it, but I think this is a little different. So
there's already some shading.
Yeah, sure, but yeah, I don't know. I've been told that people actually look at this at this WPT platform test dashboard and make their decision on whether to do something on WebRTC or on a native app.
Right.
And to them, basically, red is like scary, right? So if that's like a tool which
like
people
the runaway slide.
yeah, exactly, right. And if that's the case, then maybe changing some of the colors might actually make it look less frightening.
More shades would definitely be good, but I can tell you, just looking at the numbers here, there are very few red ones where it's 99% complete.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean the threshold for yellow would have to be determined.
Yeah.
The threshold for light red seems to be around 50%. So if you map in your head the light red to yellow, then you might get a nicer looking picture. But
oops, what the hell happened here? Okay, let me try to back up.
So switch light red to yellow. Is that what we're saying?
so if it stands still for a moment, that one. So you see that in the bottom left, there's a 2/3 good, which is light red.
Right.
And there's shadings like you see in the middle. There's 8 out of 9, which is very light red, and 7 out of 9 is slightly redder. So we might ask for a yellow.
Yeah, because right now it looks like the chart is bleeding.
Right.
That's why they call it a bleeding edge.
Get a tourniquet. So what is the conclusion here that what we're recommending, Harold, specifically, so we can write it down maybe?
So I think we're making a suggestion of using yellow for the lightest reds, just as a matter of aesthetics.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, what's happening here? Okay. All right. So let's talk about the status. So first of all, we adopted a test before commit policy at TPAC in November 2017. So might be worth talking a little bit about how well that's working or not working. We've only had a few tests submitted as a result of that policy, specifically, due to changes in the spec. On the other hand, there are no WebRTC PC PRs that are currently marked needs test. So the test before commit policy doesn't appear to be blocking or causing some huge backlog or anything of that nature. So just wanted to check with the group. Are there any objections to continuing the test before commit policy? It doesn't seem to be causing any problems, right? Okay. So let's talk about the issues and the PR status in WPT. There are quite a few issues open more than 30 days. So 14 total open issues, 9 open more than 30 days. Several of which we'll be talking about that have a major effect on the red status. We'll get into. And PRs, 40 PRs have been merged since we went to CR. 11 are currently open and 6 are open more than 30 days. So we'll be chatting a little bit here about whether we need some process changes to improve the frequency of the PR submissions or to improve the velocity of the PR review. And I'll turn it over to Suarez to talk about the general issues in ownership. Are you on the?
I'm here. Yeah, as you might see that the activities in the web platform test, there has been quite a lot of issues that is unresolved, and most of it is due to the lack of ownership actually for the WT project inside WPT, because most of the current owners are working on a volunteering basis, so a lot of time that when there's a PR there, if the owners do not have time to review the test, then they do not get approved, then and it does not get merged into the master branch. And also, since we have quite a few, we have not many owners out there. So if the owners themselves submitted a PR and there's no other owners that can review it, even if the PR has already reviewed by others, then it could also potentially block the PR from being merged. So I think this is a good chance to call for action to see that if anybody here is willing to take ownership of the project, so that we can move forward the projects. Yeah, that's all.
You have another. Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we just talk about this one? What changes we want to make?
So yeah,
to make a little comment on that one, when Suarez started to work on all those tests right earlier last year already, I was running after everybody, all the browser vendors, to have at least one representative by vendor to actually make comment and review the test, and I eventually gave up. I really did not find a solution there to have someone that has, one, enough knowledge, and two, enough time to be able to do a good review. I think what FIPO is doing by providing some rules of the thumb is useful because it can help people that want to submit tests to go through a checklist and educate themselves. But eventually, we really need people that are knowledgeable to allocate time there. Otherwise, we'll come back, 1 year later and say, well, the test you wrote was not good enough, right? Okay, I just failed to find a way to address that last year, and I really hope we can address that this time.
I'll make one comment from other groups that I've been in. Some of the most successful, the most success we've had with test writing has come from QA people, among those who are implementing. If you I guess it's basically what Alex is saying, but that's my suggestion for who to tap, right? It's the quality assurance people are the ones they're used to doing that already. They tend to be very good at it.
That assumes that you have dedicated QA people who are knowledgeable in this field.
Well, that's true, but like for me, I don't have QA people. Okay, so companies are more likely to have QA people. I understand that you may not have someone who are dedicated to that, but chances are, well, anyway, I'll just leave that as a suggestion.
So there's an issue there in finding. We have now reduced this to a previously unsolved problem, finding enough good QA people.
Right. Can we come up with a suggestion, some way forward on this? That's maybe a little bit less pessimistic than that, Harold?
So just a question, is the bottleneck finding reviewers or people to own PRs, or both?
Since we have the biggest, the fastest way to turn off new contributors is to let their peers languish without review. So it's so I'd say that given the current state, I think we need reviewers first.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because it's the obvious bottleneck now.
So can we at least get a couple more reviewers?
Can we get commitments from a browser vendor to ask to ask them to come up with to try to find some more reviewers?
Well, I will commit to trying to find someone from the Edge team.
And I'll try to find someone like Google and try not to do it myself.
So Since we're talking about process, apologies if this is well known, but is there anything in the process that says that people who submit PRs have to have tested their tests on a number of browsers, or a way to see that the test succeeds ahead of reviewing it?
I thought that the process was you test on at least one browser, and then you trust the Travis to actually test on a few others. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for any single one of us that doesn't have access to something like Kite to test over 18 different browser configurations, right?
Right. I mean, we just saw this nice dashboard. I'm wondering if that could be something could be automated even.
But there is automatic test run on each of the PR, isn't it? Which browser configuration are tested against?
Tests are at least run on Chrome and Firefox. I don't recall the details for Edge and Safari. It may be that they are run sometimes on those, but I'm not sure. But yeah, each PR gets tested on at least Chrome and Firefox to see if there are not obvious test failure when running them.
I think FIPO has a counterexample in one of these slides of automatic merge of something with replace track that was not working, failing on Firefox.
I mean, to be clear, what the Travis run does is ensuring that there is consistent results on running a test across Firefox and Chrome. And of course, if you find that the consistent result is that it fails, you probably should make sure that you're confident this is an unexpected failure rather than a failure due to your test.
Yeah, okay, I think I understand. I think that this would probably work better when the process... there's some other things that prevent tests from running in Firefox. So I understand we're going to talk about separately.
So in Chrome, we have recently instituted a mechanism whereby bugs are filed automatically if the owners have bought into it and new failures occur in these directories. I'm supposed to be on the receiving end for the WebRTC bugs, and I have seen surprisingly few of those. So I'm not sure the pipeline is working.
I just wondered, would it be possible, because I mean historically I'm not sure how much that still is a problem, but would it be possible for PRs to basically, when someone submits a PR and check against basically the API exposure from the Confluence thing we talked about before, that comparing basically, hey, this fails on Chrome, but like Confluence tells us the thing you're testing is actually supposed to work, or at least it's exposed there. So kind of like as a warning of like, hey, this is supposed to work. Go double check that your test is not like bad.
Right.
Is that like an option to help with the PRs? Because I understand that like for people to write this is actually probably not easy to understand which browser has actually implemented it, what's the state of the implementation. So I have a little bit the feeling that sometimes people submit PRs and like test it on one browser, like write their test against the one browser, and then they're like, oh, it fails on the three other ones. Probably they haven't implemented it.
I mean, one challenge is to determine automatically what it is that you're trying to test, and so what data would we be comparing these two? So, I mean, I think partly that's what we expect PR reviewers to do this double check that in fact the results aren't too bizarre. But as Alex was saying, that requires people that have some reasonably good understanding of the implementation landscape.
do we require to have like reviews from all browser vendors, or is like basically the expectation if one browser vendor has like let's say one person for reviews, that one person then also needs to understand the implementation state of the other browsers?
And maybe to clarify, what test reviewers are expected to do is reviewing the test. Results are generated is one hint for a test reviewer that something may be wrong with the test. But nobody expects that every test should pass on every browser, or that browsers should say, oh, I don't pass this test, so this test should not be committed. So I think it's, again, clearly understanding which tests pass when they get submitted is an important hint. But it's just a hint, and there may be test cases that get approved despite being wrong. I mean, that has happened, and that will happen again. I think the main concern is finding enough test reviewers, possibly giving them some guidance, some checklists to be armed for their reviews. But I wouldn't focus too much on the fact that some tests may or may not get the right implementation results. That's better addressed on a test-by-test basis, I think.
Okay. So at least I think we have the action item that Harold suggested. Any other potential actions here from a process point of view? Okay. So Suarez, you also had some observations on test helpers.
So this is more related to the slides that we might discuss later on, which is on the helpers. So the original plan for the web platform test was actually that we wanted as little helper as possible, so that there's not many abstractions. But as time goes on and as more tests are written, we are also adding more and more tests. And the way we add this is by defining global variables and then include them using a script tag. And using this, because of this, there have been some discussion on how to keep track of the usage of these helpers and how to manage the helpers. So I guess there's some ways that we can keep in mind, especially when we are doing some more refactoring. That, for example, maybe we can move the helper functions to a new helper directory. We can also consider about using the newer ES module, ES 2015 features, such as the ES module and also a single await. Although I'm not sure about the convention of using this in WPT because this might break the test running in older browsers that does not support. So yeah, these are just my observation and point of discussion. That's it.
Well, I would support using async await. I believe async await is supported in every browser that supports WebRTC.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And I think I've seen async await used in web platform tests already. At least a grep from that seemed to indicate that.
In general, to answer.
Definitely some tests that use async await. Yeah.
I think that would be a huge win for WebRTC in particular is very asynchronous. So I would love for all new tests to be written with async await. We have like 1,000-line transceiver test that we have in our own Moki tests for Firefox that I would love to contribute to web platform tests at some point, and it uses async await.
So we have 64 occurrences of await in the current WebRTC test suite. So yes, we already passed that bridge. But what about modules?
Right.
Maybe let's go to the other one first. Like I'm in favor of the helper directory. I think it helps with someone who comes new to the thing to distinguish. If we name the directory properly, I think it makes it easier to understand what this is. So I would be in favor of that.
Definitely get it out of the way of the test themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Identify similar helpers and trying to unify those. Sounds good.
So for the purposes of the minutes, are there any of these suggestions we don't want to take, or we approve all of them? Okay. I guess for the minutes, Vivian, just say we want to take the recommendations from Suarez.
Right. I guess we didn't talk about modules, but that would be a significant change, I guess. But yes, I would love to see that. I guess the question would be if we had to do it, change everything or increment toward using modules in newer tests.
Incremental is a good way.
It's a good way, yeah. If you want to keep things working, sure.
Right.
Okay. All right. So wanted to talk about a few of the issues and PRs. So we'll do a couple of those and then leave some of the dependency issues to a further discussion. So about the mock media stream data for WebRTC tests. Basically, for browsers that don't have command line flags, this is causing an issue. So somehow you need to get a media stream. And there are a couple of ways you can do it. You can use the WebDriver APIs to get mock data. You can get, I guess you suggested, Jan-Ivar, fake audio tracks from WebAudio. And a couple other ways are Canvas capture stream or video capture stream. I think Suarez suggested using the receiver.track that you get from ad transceiver. Currently, I don't believe that choice E is widely supported because ad transceiver isn't widely supported. And the issue is that those browsers that support Canvas or video capture stream also typically support the WebDriver API, so it's kind of no incremental benefit from that. Are there situations, Jan-Ivar, where you think it'd be useful to use fake audio tracks? Is that what?
You mean using capture stream and WebAudio?
No, I meant you suggested at one point fake audio tracks from WebAudio.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'll lump that in with Canvas capture stream for you, so to have a solution for audio and video. I mean,
it's a little bit more widely supported though than Canvas capture stream or video capture stream.
Oh, okay. Yes. So, well, it depends on what we are going to use these tracks for. Like E, for instance, with the ad transceiver receiver track, would obviously not contain much data. It's a chicken and egg problem if you're going to use that to test peer connection. And I think for web platform tests, do we really need to be testing with camera and microphone in order to test that peer connection? The API works? I would say no, but I also know that internally browsers we prefer to test with at least our camera and microphone stack. So I mean, but if WebDriver, I don't know that as well. But if that works just as well.
I was about to comment on on the WebDriver API. So Apple released an implementation of a WebDriver API that allows to handle the permission and specifically for get user media. But as far as I know, it's Apple only, so it's prefixed by the URL in the WebDriver API is prefixed specifically for Apple, and it didn't make its way into the WebDriver specification yet. So they implemented it in Safari Driver, but they didn't put it in the spec. And number two, it's WebDriver, right? So WPT is not depending on WebDriver. Some people use WebDriver to run WPT, but it's not mandatory. So we still need a way that does not depend on the WebDriver API to actually do that, right?
So my understanding is that there is ongoing work to make some test cases depend on WebDriver for the test runner. But as I think Yaniva was saying, if we don't need get user media streams, which for WebRTC I think is probably 99.9% of the cases, then we should not use get user media and skip that issue altogether using capture stream or web audio generated streams.
I think my point is that I think web audio is the most widely implemented of all these choices, so the fake audio track thing might actually work.
Right. But what about video?
When I looked at it, Canvas capture stream and video capture stream had the same level of support as WebDriver. So that is, if you didn't support WebDriver, you probably didn't support those two either. And the E was the worst, so because the transceiver support was most poor.
Right. The bad thing about E is also that it doesn't give you data.
Right.
So in Firefox, we do have some tests that actually analyze data coming through. I don't know if web platform tests offhand have tests that test the media to that extent over peer connection. The data is actually flowing.
We have some internal tests that do that too. Some of them generate data using Canvas and then analyze it in similar ways.
Right. So I don't know if that the goal of web platform tests is to test interop or like end-to-end.
Well, Leonard will have a presentation on the technical uses of it for that, but at least for this, what I'm looking for is, do we have any conclusions about things we should look at? Like, should we try, suggestion B, the fake audio tracks, see if we get any better coverage, as an example. Any thoughts?
Well, it would definitely make anything that would make it greener, I think, would be good. I had a separate question though. Is there a way to, because a lot of these web platform tests, we're able to run them in Firefox because we have these ini files that add some preps. And that would be the other option, I guess, if these dashboards could be somehow modified to accept that. Is the problem that Firefox doesn't accept a command line parameter?
Dr. Alex, is Firefox timing out? I thought it was only Edge.
It's mainly Edge, yes. Firefox and Chrome and Safari are manageable.
Okay.
Is the problem with Edge just the lack of the permissions prompt skip or also the lack of media devices? Because Edge has a registry key for skipping the prompt.
Yeah, I thought it was a command line thing. Is that right, Dr. Alex?
For Edge, for just the permission prompt, there are several hacks. So the Edge team gave us a lot of things. You can manually accept the permission once, and basically it keeps it in memory forever, not like 30 days like Chrome does. That's one way around. There is the registry. There is a lot of ways to do that, but all in all, is not very stable. And from one revision to the next, whether it's Edge or the corresponding Edge driver, it's not resilient.
So do we have a conclusion from this discussion? Or we can try things and see if we can come up with something better?
Well, I think it's good to have the list. There's a few I didn't think about, so I will have my team try a few, well, all of them, and see if it improves a little bit the greenness of the different dashboard we maintain.
Okay.
It would be nice if we could come up with an agreement of which one we prefer to put in a WPT specifically.
Right. Okay, so I guess the action item is Dr. Alex's team will experiment, and maybe you can make a recommendation based on what you try and what the results are.
But just spitballing, if we decided to have a helper file, if we had a helper to just basically get an audio track or something like that, or get a stream with an audio track, and then you could have if Edge, then web audio, else microphone. I mean, that might be one way to at least separate the concerns and the web platform tests themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a great thing if we manage to do that.
Okay, so potential item to try to create helpers and see if that works. All right. So 9213, this I think Dr. Alex will get into, assuming we can get through this quickly enough, which is issues with generating RTP, like some of the more sophisticated features like contributing sources. You need things like a mixer to client header extension, simulcast tests. So you need some kind of server, a mixer, SFU. And then I think, Dr. Alex, you're going to cover this, right, in your portion?
Yeah, we have implemented some simulcast and multi-stream tests. I will report on the results.
Okay, so we'll get to this in a minute. And then issue 83.836.871 from Chrome is that WebRTC tests are leaking resources. And we'll talk about cleaning things up and how we can avoid some of the leakage problems in a minute. So, Fippo, are you on the call?
I am. So as we know, writing good tests is hard, and as we've seen in the past, making them pass in all browsers is even harder than that. And I mean, we've mentioned it already, it's very time-consuming to test in all browsers, even if we just limit it to stable versions. And I mean, we've already identified that we have a problem with reviews, that they're not happening. And I'll show some examples of where Chrome is exporting new tests, which is great, but they lack review from other browser vendors. Can you go to the next slide, Bernard, please? Thank you. So I don't think it's realistic to expect tests to pass in all browsers initially. And at least we should have a process during the code review that this has to be explained at least. In which browsers this was tested, in which browsers this failed, and for what reason. If it's just a JavaScript error in the console, that might be easy to fix. But, I mean, we've already said it needs attention from the vendors, and if there are bugs, probably an upstream bug submission, and that requires a time commitment. And we have a problem getting that. I mean, for the browser vendors, it's good to see the areas where you can easily improve. And if you see, oh, most browsers pass in one test, if you fix yours, we are done with that. That would be great. But currently, we have too much red in the dashboard to really achieve that, I think. Next slide. The cleanup after yourself seems to be a quite big problem currently. I looked, and most of the recent Chrome tests didn't clean up after themselves. Dependencies are another issue, like the dependency on add transceiver to get a media stream track instead of get user medias. And the question is, where do we draw the line? We need an agreement on that, I think. And automatic upstreaming without review is tricky. I think it's on the next slide. Oh no, cleanup first. So Web Platform Tests has a function to add a cleanup, which is executed after the test is done, even if the test errors out with an assertion. And from what I've seen, Travis CI sometimes has trouble even with as little as 20 open peer connections in tests. Then tests become flaky, meaning they will be read. So cleaning up after the test is really important.
This is on Firefox, yes?
I've seen it on Firefox and Chrome.
Yeah, the limit in Chrome should be around 500, so that's surprising if it reaches that high.
Yeah, I think it's limitations on the Travis machines, which are not very generous in terms of memory and CPU power.
Yes, and above certain amount of peer connections, you might also run into trouble with like allocating ports and stuff like that. So you get all kind of funky behavior.
Yeah, that's why we did the 500.
Mm. Yeah, and it seems to be an issue even much lower than that in Travis, which is very sad, but it just means we need to be careful.
If you have a reliable test on that on Chrome, please send it to me, because I have an open issue that I've been trying to reproduce and failing.
Will do.
Thank you.
Just one more information there. For example, for Firefox, one of the problems is it's not about the total amount of open ports you see actually on the ICE level, because internally the Firefox process also has more file handles, so you can run into the maximum file handles on the given operating system before reaching your ICE maximum numbers of ports. And like the browser basically doesn't notify you about that, right? You basically just get like some internal errors and things go south.
Oh yes, we had one of those recently too. We ran out
like a totally unpredictable number, basically.
Yeah. We ran out of Unix domain sockets.
Yeah, something like that, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, we have the same problem for get user media. If you don't release the track, then you might get strange issues with resolution and requesting a different aspect ratio, and that might not work. So it should always be released after the test. And it's probably very hard to do automatically, so code review should look for that. I mean, in Chrome it didn't recently. So, right. I mean, using the add transceiver stuff to get tracks was a good idea, but it was mostly a workaround for the lack of fake devices on things like Travis and in WebRTC in general. And at least on Travis, Chrome fixed that in mid-March, and the Firefox support for that is a priority 1 in Fulip's team. And if you look at the media capture streams dashboard, it looks pretty green and good in Chrome now. So we will probably see some improvement there soon. Dependencies in helpers are really hard to spot. And like Bernard gave the example of the ICE transport, depending on the DTLS transport. And I think we need to agree that dependencies should be explicit and not implicit, hidden in some helper file, because that makes the review very, very hard. And we've covered a transceiver. And another example is depending on pc.sctp, which no browser implements. Should that stop us from testing any data channel stuff? Probably not. Next slide, please. And we've seen issues that the whole RTC peer connection without arguments doesn't work in Edge, whereas RTC peer connection null does. And apparently, as Sergio found out, Edge sometimes crashes if you don't give ICE service in the constructor. And the question is, are we going to be generous and always pass null in the constructor to make Edge happy and make more tests run in Edge, or do we not do that because the spec doesn't require it?
Well, from my point of view, it seems reasonable to have a test that, if you really want to have no argument work, you can have a separate test to test that and make that one red. But making a zillion tests red just because of that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
My worry about this is rather the cognitive load of requiring everyone who writes tests to remember that you need to supply null because there's a browser out there that you're not testing on that is going to crash otherwise. Yeah. I write RTC connection with no argument all the time.
Well, you fixed it in Chrome. 52, I think?
A long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, a helper function to construct CPA connections that takes these quirks into account is probably a good idea.
So I would be in favor of saying that we have a set of helper functions that tests should call for certain functions if that's what they're testing. Mm-hmm. So get pay connection, get track, and get audio track, get video track, that sort of thing.
Okay. So Vivian, for the minutes, I guess, talk about use helper functions that might make some of this a little bit easier.
Well, from our experience, I mean, I think it has been said already, but like, if we do this helper functions, we probably want to run them in a separate test run to be aware when they start failing. That was like a lesson we learned in our past. Because otherwise, basically, if someone modifies the helper or something like this and they start failing, then suddenly all of your tests start or some tests start failing and you don't know why.
Yeah, this becomes a game of testing the tests in the end. Okay, next slide, please. So I had two examples of Chrome upstreaming without any new review in the web platform test repository. One was replace track, which was read on the web platform test dashboard in Firefox, and I was surprised by that because Firefox has implemented replace tracks for 4 or 5 years now, and it turned out that the tests used add track with just a track and without any streams, which is currently not supported in Firefox. That was trivial to fix, and we even found a spec issue because we reviewed that. I think Janiva did that. So this shows review is good, but I wouldn't automatically, without any review, merge those tests into web platform tests. And the other issue was that Harald wrote a helper function that checked on the can insert DTMF, which is not implemented in Firefox, and that was trying to work around a Chrome issue and then broke the test in Firefox. And I mean,
I think it's actually a spec issue that when that one turns true, and I even think I found support in the spec for saying that it should be false until you connect it. Mm. But yes, that's the problem with helpers.
Yeah.
And I think a larger issue here for the last couple of slides is that there's a safe area, a subset of WebRTC that's the sort of safe area that a lot of browsers support. And so ideally, whenever we're testing one feature and a feature doesn't work, we want one red test, not 100 red tests. So it's a bit of an art to write dependencies such that only one test fails, not several, because of a missing feature.
Yeah.
So, as far as catching that in review, I guess that can be that may work. I don't know what the best solution for it is. Sorry, that was my comment.
Currently the web the web platform tests don't have like any I don't know how to call it, like at the beginning of a test, like a check of like let's say like if this is like adding trying to test like transceivers, like basically check if transceivers is supported on the browser at all, and if not, kind of like skip over it and don't actually try to run the test. I don't know if that's what would help in certain scenarios, but
right.
Yeah, that would be a way to make those dependencies explicit, probably by adding a test that tests the existence of the IDL
Right.
in the same file.
something like, I mean, like again, probably like another helper function, right? Is transceiver supported? And if the answer is no, skip. Right? Like, because I know that like my test relies on this further downstream or something like this. Although then then it's the other drawback with that is it's hard to keep your numbers correct, because then you need to know like how many tests you're going to skip and stuff like that.
Just on the first example though with the replace track, I mean, add track should, according to the spec, work without a stream argument. So that was a bug in Firefox. So I mean, that part seemed to work. I mean, I don't necessarily see a problem in that case, because those things do get fixed, and the test is correct.
One question I had, did these two examples, did they got merged through GitHub PRs, or did these get merged through being written on the Chrome site, and then I don't know what the system is called for pushing fixes from the Chrome repository automatically into WPT? I know that we have something like that on the Firefox side, and I think it's like a policy thing that like small fixes can be upstreamed automatically through the process, and new tests are not supposed to go that way.
No, there's no such policy on the Chrome side, at least.
Okay, but I think that's the problem, right? Because if I write like a new test on the Firefox side, we're testing only against Firefox, and then it looks green on my end, and then our automatic process basically like would push it into WPT.
Yep. And then it gets automatically pushed into Chrome, and the Chrome automatic importer notes that it fails, writes an expectation file saying failure and files a bug and sends it to me. That's how it's supposed to work.
The last part we don't have on the Firefox side. So in our case, the import happens, and then someone has to manually look at it and like figure out like, oh yeah, and most of the time it just gets marked as by some non-WebRTC person as like, oh, yet another failing web platform test, and it gets like written down as failed, and then like we as the WebRTC people don't even notice.
So I guess the question there is whether the review process would be helpful for writing new tests, right? I don't think.
I think that's why I was saying like earlier on the Firefox side. I think there's like more like a policy thing of saying like, yeah, if you have like typo fixes and these kind of small things, should use the automated process. If it's like a bigger thing, like a new test, then basically don't try to use the automated system, but feed it through PRs on GitHub.
No, we have the opposite. We're encouraged to add test coverage for new features as web platform tests. In fact, adding an internal test is explicitly discouraged, and this will be automatically uploaded and merged.
So I guess, is there a question for the group here about whether this is okay, or whether we should add review, or whether we don't want to add more barriers to progress?
Yeah, I think it shows that this will cause a lot of redness in the dashboard at some point. So do we want that to accumulate or not?
Well, at least the tests are getting written.
Case of replace track, right? He went for a PR, and they were the Travis build, and only when the two builds were successful was the thing merged, right? So I think the process is not too bad there. We just need to put more builds, right? I still don't understand why the Firefox build with Travis didn't catch it during the process.
I suspect it was blocked on the lack of get user media on Travis.
Probably, yeah. Probably disabled it for something for that reason.
Right, but I mean, the process as it is already has a functionality to test against Firefox. It's not perfect. We need to harden that, but I don't think the process itself is bad, right?
It should get better once we fix the permission issue, yeah, I think.
Yeah.
It's not like it was not tested against Firefox and people just went through it testing only in Chrome. It was tested against Firefox and the test reporting okay. That's where the problem is.
I would have to look up those tests, but I think they didn't pass in Firefox. They didn't pass on the web platform test dashboard, at least.
And one problem whenever we queue something and test you for upload, we do get the email back from the web platform test importer. But it's actually quite hard to tell from that mail whether the test failed or succeeded in Firefox.
So people, to answer to your question, I actually looked at the PR today to see what happened in the process, and I can see on the live stream on the GitHub that the two tests were successful for Travis, right? There were no manual interventions, so everything was done through bots. But there was still a test against Firefox.
Let's see. Yeah, we can take that offline and discuss it on the list later.
Sounds good.
All right. So should we move on to the example test, Stefan?
Yes. Can you open the code, or will everybody look at it in their own browser?
That was a question. Do you want to look at the PR, or you want me to open the PR?
Yes. I can talk about it while you have it open.
Okay. All right.
Right. If you can go to Files Changed.
All right. Files Changed.
Yes, and please untick Show Comments, because HBoss left quite some comments there.
Okay, unclick Show Comments, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it took a single test that was testing that add track. Let's see. Add track with a single argument and no media stream should succeed, and that was failing in Chrome because in the end Chrome didn't implement the transceiver model and didn't implement get receivers, or no, get transceivers. And I split that up into a setup function, which basically is like something you have in other testing frameworks like Jasmine or Mocha or Kamar, that basically sets up the peer connection, calls get user media, gets the track from that, and then returns the peer connection, the RTP sender, and the stream. And that way, that helper function also adds the cleanup. We've talked about that earlier, because it's important. And one of the bad things about the test harness stuff is that the cleanup needs to go in the setup function, which is a bit violates the separation of concerns about setup and cleanup. And that way I could, I think we can go back to the slides now.
Okay.
Unless someone really wants to look at that. Okay, next slide. Yeah, we covered that. The question is really, do we want to create wrappers for get user media and RTC peer connection, which are responsible for the cleanup? We've actually done that in the Chrome bug, but we'll cover that in a few slides. Next slide. So
Hello?
yeah.
If I may add a comment there, I think we talked about this. The async test also is an issue because it runs all of the tests. It runs the test functions in in parallel, and that the cleanup function doesn't help there because if you have more than 20 tests, you also have more than 20 of active peer connections at the same time.
Yeah, it seems we should avoid async test for that reason and just stick to promise test for anything that's asynchronous. Because promise test is only guaranteed to execute one at a time. So we had the test, and it's now split up into 5 different tests, each making just a single assertion, like add track returns an RTCP sender, and then that the sender's track is set to the media stream track you got from get user media, that it creates a single RTCP sender that is in the get senders set, that it creates an RTC receiver and a transceiver. And that way we can get Chrome on the next slides from failing the test completely because it doesn't implement the transceiver model, which gives a receiver after add track, and it doesn't implement get transceivers. So we now have 3 out of 5 of these assertions passing, it shows that we're at least on the way to get to our end goal, to get everything to pass. That shows up in the HTML result, which gets counted in the dashboard. That way we get a better score, a more representative score. The problem is which of these assertions need to be repeated for the variance of the test, because we have 3 variants of the test, one with no media stream, one with a single media stream, and one with multiple media streams. And that means we have 3 very similar tests, and it's a question, do we want the coverage, and how do we deal with maintenance of those tests? I think Jan-Ivar has an opinion on repeating yourself.
Do you want my comment now, or?
Well, we can do it later.
Okay.
So I had lots of discussions about that with Jan-Ivar and HPOS yesterday, and one of the things we ended up trying was to make get user media's wrappers and RTCP connection wrappers that magically clean up after the test. And if you're interested, we discussed that in the Chrome bug. Basically, we make a WebRTC test that acts like a promise test, but will clean up the peer connection and get user media afterwards. And that lets us write a test like we see on the slide with very little setup and very little boilerplate. However, the disadvantage is that there's no explicit cleanup. And if people copy that code from the test to their production applications, they might forget that they need to clean up those things at some point. So we probably need to agree whether that's a good thing because it makes the test short and not requiring any helpers, or if that's not ideal because it's adding a lot of magic in there. And I think that's Jan-Ivar's slide.
On that slide, these wrapping things are magic. Would it be better to have helper functions? As per previously?
Yep. Yeah, that's basically my criticism as well, is that been scarred by wrappers in the past, like in some of the Firefox tests, for instance. We had a case where we had a create data channel that actually returned a promise that caused people some confusion because it wasn't actually the spec API. It was a helper function that was trying to be helpful by mimicking the spec. And I think that is a pattern I don't like in tests. I prefer tests to test the actual API. So I proposed, so Fippo and I discussed this back and forth a couple of times. So I tried to make a version that instead of cleaning up, would just assert that the test had cleaned up itself. That way we would get some test some coverage and some way to making sure that tests were doing the right thing. But even that was a little problematic. So basically, here's the same test. You have you enforce that the test must call PC close and close the tracks itself. But the assert here would actually throw. So in the case where the assert happens, you're missing the close. So then, dealing with this in JavaScript, you could use try finally and all that stuff, but it's more boilerplate. So the pro would be promoting more correct API code that doesn't skip up on cleanup. The con would be that when the asserts happen, you would get leaks, or if you had automatic cleanup magic again. So it's not really correct still to write code like this. And I had one more slide, so maybe it would just be better to next slide, please. To go with no wrappers, which I think is what FIPO originally had. As long as you have well-named helpers, maybe that would avoid using wrappers. And we could maybe even have an optional flag to run tests using those wrappers that asserts that tests don't leak. And also had a question, I guess, would these wrappers somehow interfere with some tests, like instance of tests and stuff like that? Would be a concern I have with wrappers.
Yeah, that is probably going to be problematic in some of the tests. So that is an argument against wrappers.
The tests that do things like check instance of on pay connection, they should be using the raw pay connection function. They should not be relying on the wrappers for the pay connection.
Right. So I guess the question is whether we have well-named helper functions or whether we have JavaScript that messes with the spec APIs by shimming them, basically, or modifying them. And my vote would be, I prefer that when I see a spec API call, then I know that that is the spec API call. That's my bias.
I would tend to bias the same way.
Okay. So for the minutes, Vivian, can we say that we don't want to have wrappers and go for Jan Ivor's helper approach instead?
I can argue with the shape of the helper, but
maybe the one thing that would be useful using wrappers for if you could run the test with some optional flag that could do some analysis and.
Yeah, I think it's possible to use a Chrome extension to test the tests, which would not interfere with the test code itself. I can give that a try. Then we know how many tests leak.
Okay. All right. We have a presentation by Leonard, which hopefully we can get through in our 7 minutes remaining. Leonard?
I see if I can do it in 7 minutes. So, yeah, for those of you who don't know me yet, I am Leonard Graal. I'm currently doing a master's thesis about WebRTC improvements, mostly focusing on data channels. So I went through the spec and I wrote some new data channel tests for WPT, and I ported some data channel tests from an internal test suite we have at the lab, and those incorporated some separate cross-browser tests. So what I noticed is that the vast majority of these cross-browser tests overlap with the single-browser tests we already have. So my thought was, how can we use the WPT test to do cross-browser testing as well, instead of writing those tests twice. So next slide, please. So instead of running a test in a single browser, I now have my idea is to run the test in two browsers which share the test instance. So this is the architecture I came up with. There's a tiny Sitlink server that uses WebSockets. It allows to exchange any kind of data, and it is a wanderer path for the two browsers. it has a specific URL. So in order to meet up, in order to rendezvous, you have a UID, a test index, and a role that is assigned to the browsers, and you activate that mode by passing in a specific URL parameter, which is called cross-browser. And then you have the URL parameter, which is, the URL, URL equals is then the URL of the signaling server the two browsers should connect to. And a role, of course, because, you need to assign a role to one of these browsers. Next slide, please. So the browsers connect to each other via the signaling server. They wait for each other, and then they start the test. So on the left side, we have a test that runs that we have at the moment. It is without cross-browser support. So what it does is it creates a data channel, and it waits on the peer that creates the data channel that this data channel opens. So the open event is fired, and then it's done. So on the right, we have the modified version that adds the cross-browser compatibility. So something I have to note here is that this, of course, it lets this test run in a single browser, and it lets it run in cross-browser mode. What we can see is that there's a new function, which is a wrapper, basically, or a helper. I'm not really sure what terminology you used, John Alva. So there's this cross-browser test function, and it is basically an extension of a promise test. So it has two new parameters. The first one is, of course, the test instance itself. That's nothing new. Then we have a signaling instance and a role. So the signaling instance, it abstracts away the different kind of modes we have. So in single browser mode, the function, this test function that I've defined there will be called twice with different roles. And it's connected via a signaling instance, which I call loopback signaling. So it just redirects the data from one of the tests to another and back again. And in cross-browser mode, the function will be called once, and the browsers connect via the WebSocket signaling. So this is what the signaling instance is for. At the very end of the function, we have this method being called exchange candidates and exchange descriptions, which is just some high-level helper methods on the signaling instance, which wrap. If you were to talk about exchange candidates, for example, it takes the ICE candidate event, passes that in towards the signaling, and everything that comes in from the remote side will be passed into the peer connection. So that's just some high-level wrapper function. So in order, if you need to do some SCP mangling modification or whatever, then you can still do that. So yeah, what it also does is if something fails on one side, this will be synchronized to the other side. And that's pretty much it towards the test. So they have to be rewritten in some kind of way, but it's surprisingly easy. Next slide, please. Oops. Oh, I was on too far. All right, so yes, the next steps slide. Thanks. So next possible steps from my point of view would be to modify tests to be compatible. We can also do some cleanup, adding async, await, and that kind of stuff, which we talked about earlier. What would be necessary is to update the Python script to run this cross-browser mode tests automatically by following a defined browser matrix. And at the very end, this would be really nice to have the result pushed to the WPT.FYI dashboard, so we can see what breaks or what works in cross-browser mode. So my question would be, is there something we would like to pursue? Any comments or any questions?
I guess only a general warning. Internally in Firefox, we have been down this path, and we actually gave it up because it cost too much. Well, I guess in our case it was slightly different, but we tried to reuse existing tests for 2 different environments, for running on a single machine and running on 2 different machines, and it cost too much overhead and too many problems, and so we gave it up. This is a little slightly different, but basically what I'm saying is like that there is additional costs and additional overhead, and it's a careful evaluation whether it's worth the extra cost.
To make the same comment, I remember you saying that after the steeplechase effort, Niels, and we took that into account when we designed Kite for specifically the WPT run with Kite, and we said the WPT tests are made for one purpose, which is the compliance of the JavaScript API in one browser, right? There is only a few API that requires more than one browser, and there's specifically the WebRTC one. And it's a very small subset compared to WPT. So you don't want to add a dependency to the entire WPT to something like that just for WebRTC. So it was better to make a separate tool. That was our original conclusion, I think 1.5 years ago, when we were designing Kite with the Google team and some others.
So I'm not really sure. So in order to use Kite, wouldn't that require rewriting tests anyway?
No.
I mean, it comes down to the question of whether you write your tests for 2 separate environments, 2 separate tests, right? Like what I think what Alex is saying is basically you have your WPT tests, which are really meant to run in a single browser only, and then you have your separate Kite test, which is meant for interoperability testing. And what you're proposing is basically take your WPT test. You have been removed from the call.
Goodbye.
What you're proposing is like basically reuse the test which was written with something else in mind, with like running on a single machine in a single browser, right?
Right. I mean, I get that, but as I said, I saw some significant overlap on this.
Sure. As I said, we saw the same thing. We tried it for some time. We decided against it. I don't know. At this point, it's like a look in your crystal ball, kind of like risk versus price or cost evaluation. Hard to predict. I'm not completely against it, but it's very basically proceed very cautiously. I guess it's the high level.
So I think we should discuss that separately. What phase exactly, and maybe you can give me some insights.
Okay. I'm afraid we've kind of run out of time. I didn't realize this call would go so long. So maybe we'll need to have another test-related call next month so Dr. Alex can update us on Kite and all the advanced scenario testing. But thank you for your time this week. I think that's it for today.
Okay, thank you all for showing up.
Yeah.
And we'll talk later. Bye for now.